Hello and good morning, and a very warm welcome to this webinar by Philanthropia. Maybe not good morning for you wherever you are. I'm based in Germany, so it's morning for us. But I know that we have a very international audience. My name is Eva Wieners. Have been working with Philanthropia for, I think, more than 10 years now, or coming up on 10 years. And today we will talk about the next part of the log frame, which is indicators. 2 weeks ago, we had a webinar where we talked about the logic behind the log frame. Well, log frame just means logical framework, but the intervention logic. And today we will talk about indicators and means of verification. So the next part of the log frame that is important. If you have not seen the first part, so the part about the log frame, the logical hierarchy of things you want to do in your project, then please also rewatch that later. It's uploaded on YouTube, and that will be the other part to this webinar, so it all makes a bit more sense. I have prepared a presentation that we'll go through together, and then we have time for questions. So you can use the chat, as you've already started to do, to network with each other, to exchange and use it for that. If you have questions for me, please use the Q&A box at the bottom, because in the chat it's going to be very, very difficult for me to find your questions, because usually the chat becomes very crowded at some point. So if you have questions that you want me to answer at the end of the webinar, then please use the Q&A box at the bottom. That way you make sure that I can actually see the questions and that they don't get lost in the chat. And I think for now we can just immediately jump in and get started to make best use of our time. So I think now you can all see my screen. Today's topic is developing smart indicators for your log frames, because that is an issue or an area where I know many of you struggle and have some problems in implementing or filling out the log frame, which is often a part that donors want you to fill out when you send a proposal, a full proposal for anything. I've already introduced yourself. Many of you know me already because I do most of the webinars at Philanthropia. I'm a geographer, so I did my PhD in geography as well, and I've worked in Nepal for 7 years and in Ecuador for 2. So most of my experience is international and with grassroots NGOs all across the world. So let's start with this picture. You've seen that in the last webinar as well, because last time we talked about the log frame as a whole. Usually this is what a log frame looks like, and many donors ask of you to submit a log frame with the proposal. Log frame stands for logical framework of your project, and it basically describes the logical order or the logical connections of the activities that you do in your project and what they lead to. So sometimes we also talk about a ladder just the logical hierarchy of steps of your project. And it describes from the activities up to the goal or the impact or whatever you want to call it, whatever your donor calls it, the logical connections between the steps of this ladder of your interventions and the things that happen after. So like I said, in the last webinar 2 weeks ago, we talked about this first part, the objective statements and how they kind of belong together and how you develop them. Just a very quick recap. You have activities here, so the things that you do with your project, they are still under your control. Those activities have results. They have, they have outputs, so things that happen when you implement your activities. When you finish your activities, something happens. That is the output. When the output happens, After that, you get intermediate results. So you come to the outcome level, midterm changes in either behavior, perception, or maybe even living conditions of the target group you work with. Then you have the strategic objective, which is usually the objective of your project, what you want to achieve with that one project, which is usually a change in living conditions of the target group. And then you have your goal, which is something very broad. It's the impact that you want to contribute to. You would never achieve a goal or achieve an impact with just one project. This is something that you can only contribute to because it's so big. Sometimes, for example, when you apply for funding with the European Commission, often on the goal level or the impact level, you already would put an SDG, because that is what you would contribute to. If you work with nutrition, you would contribute towards the SDG of eradicating hunger. But obviously you wouldn't achieve that because your one project cannot achieve the eradication of hunger all across the world. That's just not a possibility, but you can contribute towards it. And that's what this goal level is about. So today we will talk about column 2 and 3 and a little bit about 4, just to give you a glimpse of what that means. But then you have the entire log frame and you know what everything covers. Column 2 is indicators. That's what the brunt of this webinar is going to be about. Then column 3 is means and sources of verification. You also have to fill that out. And column 4 are critical assumptions and risks. Also, that is something that you need to fill out, and it needs to make sense. So that's why we're going to cover it today. Jumping right in with this. A log frame can be a great basis for monitoring and evaluation, the M&E, and that's what you need indicators for. That's why you need proper indicators and need to formulate them. They're not just systems of planning, but also systems of accountability. So a great log frame, a good log frame with proper indicators will also help you to be able to report on your project and to tell if your project was successful or not successful. Because if your indicator, you will have an indicator at the value for your indicator at the beginning of your project and at the end. And that is how you can see if your project was successful, if you've changed the value of that indicator or not. So that is going to help you with reporting. And that is also how donors will determine if your project was successful. So this is very important. It will set the foundation of your project's M&E system. So think carefully about what you put in there at the proposal stage, because it's not just something you promise at the proposal stage, it's something that you actually have to report on later. And yeah, to have this, we'll come to the horizontal logic. We've discussed the vertical logic of your log frame last time, and today we'll come to the horizontal. So what are these other fields in columns 2, 3, and 4 supposed to mean and supposed to have as input? What are performance indicators? We all know the word, we throw that around a lot, but what are they specifically? Indicators or performance indicators are an objectively verifiable way to measure results. So when you put an indicator, you go from just guessing or having a feeling that your project is a success or that the measures you're implementing are actually helping the people you want to work with, to actually knowing, because you'll be able to measure them. You'll be able to tell someone, yes, this was a success because XYZ happened, because this value went from this to that, etc. It's a quantifiable measure of a characteristic or a condition of people, institutions, systems, or processes that may change over time. So usually we talk about target groups, but obviously you can also set out to change institutions and general systems, or even processes that happen in any kind of system. So usually as examples, we use target groups that you directly work with, because that's many projects would be covered by this example, and it's also the simplest, but obviously you can also work on different levels. And indicators are the basis for observing progress and measuring actual results compared to expected results. So with the help of indicators, you'll be able to say, yes, we made progress here, we achieved what we wanted to achieve, or we didn't. So also throughout your implementation, it tells you if you run into roadblocks, if there's anything you need to adjust, or yeah, if there's anything you need to change. You also have to remember when you design indicators or you choose indicators that some of them, especially the outcome and the higher levels, can become part of the grant agreement. So this is what I also said last time. When you design a log frame, it's for the proposal. Don't only think of the proposal, but think further, because this will actually be the kind of roadmap that tells you how to implement your project. And so it needs to be realistic as well. So don't make up stuff that just sounds good for the proposal and that you think will convince the donor, but use things obviously that you can actually achieve. Don't overpromise, because many times these things will be used in the grant agreement, and in the M&E later, so you will be measured against that. So if you overpromise, even if your project is amazing, it will still be logged as a failure with donors. So just be careful what you put in there and make it realistic. Make it something that you can actually achieve. Only include the ones that you are confident that you can measure, but also the ones that you are confident that you can reach. Being able to measure indicators obviously is very important as well, because sometimes we include indicators that would be great, but are super difficult to measure. So you would need a lot of resources to go out to measure those, especially if we talk about qualitative indicators. If you have to collect a lot of data to verify indicators. So if you're talking about change of perception, change of the way people think about something, that is great if you can prove that. But to be able to prove that, usually you have to do interviews and lots of them. And that is something that you might not have the resources for at the end of a project. So just choose the ones that you know that you can measure, that you can report on, but obviously also choose the ones that you are comfortable that you will achieve. Because if you overpromise again, then your project will be logged as a failure, even if everything else worked very well. Why do you need performance indicators? Well, they describe the results. With that, you move from just having a feeling that the things you do work to actually having proof and to actually having numbers, to prove that what you're doing makes sense, that what you're doing actually has an impact or contributes to an impact. It helps to measure and verify achievements of objective statements. So again, it gives some more sustenance or substance to your claims. It helps to identify if a project needs changes, mid-course corrections. So if you run into a roadblock, which often we think it would be super obvious when we're running into a roadblock, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes we just do the project work, and then at the end we write a report and we realize, oh my God, we just achieved half of what we wanted to achieve. But if you have indicators and you report on them constantly, regularly at milestones, then you realize if there's something that needs changing. And it's always better to approach a donor midway through a project and say, look, this is just not working the way we thought it would. We have reasons, or sometimes there's no reason, sometimes we don't know why, but it's not working. That is always better than to come back after the project is finished and say, well, we didn't achieve what we wanted to achieve. So it gives you a chance to make corrections. And it helps you to take management decisions timely when they need to be taken and better informed with the data that you need. So if you want to make changes, if you feel like you need to adjust stuff, then you can do so with a database, a data decisions based on data. When you think about or you develop your indicators, there's kind of 5 questions that can guide you to choose indicators that are actually helpful and that you can also report on. First question is for whom? Who's the indicator for? So is it for the funders, the project management, the ground staff? Who is it for? How much? What quantities will be measured by the indicator? What's the targeted change in these quantities? So do you want to build something and go from number X to number Y? Do you want to have a percentage change in school attendance, in the way people see things, etc.? What is the quantity change that you want to achieve? What's the quality change targeted? So what is the qualitative measure? For example, if you build a school, should that school then also live up to specific standards, or should it just be there? Which standards are those? If you say, okay, we want 50% of births to be in hospitals, should they adhere to any kind of standards, or should it just be a hospital? That is what you kind of have to define here. Then time bound, very important. By when should this happen? When do you plan on achieving the target change? This is determined by the level of the outcome statement, the kind of data your indicator needs to collect. So this can be very short term if you're at the output level. It can be long term when you're at the impact level, etc. But adding like this time element to an indicator is always great, because otherwise, if you don't say by when you want to achieve a specific change, then you don't have any pressure. You can also say, okay, this is 20 years from now. Obviously, if it's a grant agreement, that's not possible, but that's why you need this element. And then can you locate the place and level of beneficiary or project participant target group at which change will be observed? So should it be at the level of the individual, an adult, a child, a girl, a boy, a man, a woman, an institution, a village, a state, a country, a system, etc.? Which level do you operate at? This will become more obvious when we look at examples on the next slides or on the slides following. But those are kind of the 5 questions that indicators have to answer. This, as you probably have realized, this also follows the SMART model. You need SMART indicators. They need to be specific, time-bound, measurable, etc. This is kind of the same system that tells you how to develop good indicators. So this is how you can develop an indicator with following that question. The base indicator that you want to achieve would be child mortality is reduced. If you add the quantity, how much should it be reduced? You add the percentage, the quality, what exactly is supposed to be reduced. So in this case, communicable diseases, not just the mortality rate in general, but by what specifically, by those diseases, and time, by the end of project, by the end of year, by a specific time. So those quantity, quality, and time are those factors that you kind of add to the base indicator to get a proper indicator that then you can measure on, you can report on. For the project B, another example, if the base indicator is the increased knowledge of women farmers, then the quantity would be the number of women. So you need a specific number. The quality is farming techniques. So this is what this is about. Not just knowledge in general, not just knowledge about farming in general, but farming techniques in specific. And then the time after 1 year. So those are the 3 elements that need to be added to this base indicator to get an indicator that you can actually measure and that is going to be helpful in your log frame. So at this highest level, the impact level or the goal or whatever that your donor, whatever you call that in your organization, it's very, very good to link that to the SDGs or to international donor indicators. Sometimes, like the very big organizations, UN organizations, they already tell you what kind of indicators they want to work on, what kind of indicators or what kind of goals, obviously, they want you to contribute to. So when you use those, it makes it easier for the donors to kind of understand where your proposal would fall into within their own frameworks. Obviously, it's a movement among donors because everybody has pledged to support the SDGs. It makes your proposal more competitive because the donor can clearly see where and how you would contribute. It makes your project comparable to others, which is also a plus because donors have to choose between many, many proposals. And if it's easy to compare, then it's easy for them to choose. If every single project has their own goal, it's very difficult for them to choose. And then you might need a bit more luck to actually get into that pile of proposals that get considered. It's also easier to access secondary data. When we look at sources of verification, you realize that you need some sources to verify your indicators, to verify your progress on indicators or where you fall on this progression. And for the SDGs or for internationally recognized indicators that many donors use, there's much more data. So it's going to be much easier for you to access that. You can reduce your own workload because you don't have to think of those things. You don't have to develop your own impact or your own impact statement that you want to contribute to. But obviously, it's also important that everything's informed by local context and priorities. If it doesn't make sense to say your goal is to contribute to an SDG or to one of those higher level indicators, well, then don't do it. But oftentimes it does make sense and it makes your life easier if you choose that. So if you choose an SDG as the highest level impact, the goal that you want to achieve, that can inform a lot of the rest of your log frame. So here are some examples. You will get the presentation so you can recheck them. If you choose something like reduction under 5 mortality rate, 2 or less than 25 deaths per live births, it's a bit complicated how it's put. This is based on the SDG target for the Agenda 2030, obviously. So you can check the SDGs and see which one would be the one that you contribute to with your project. They have the overall goals. Then they also have some more specific objectives that you can all check if you contribute to one of them. This is an SDG. The bottom one would be for the 2020 target for global vaccine from the action plan. So that is something that, again, many donors have signed up on to this plan, that they wanted to achieve a specific number of diseases that are eradicated or diseases that most people are vaccinated for. And if you kind of put that goal on your log frame and ensure that your project contributes towards that goal that maybe this donor has signed up for anyways, that is always going to be helpful. So now we'll talk about the different types of performance indicators that we have. So again, we have the objectives on the very left side. I mean, this is not supposed to be a log frame, but you see it has the same category. So you have the objectives on the left, which is activities, results and outputs, specific objectives and results, goals and specific objectives. So this is kind of the the ladder that I talked about last time, where you have the process indicators and then output, outcome, impact, always one level higher, output being the most short-term, immediate result of your activities. Then what the people do with those outputs, they use the services, the knowledge, the goods that you distributed, and then they change something for themselves. That is the outcome level. So they change either their perception or they change their approach, they change their living conditions. And then that contributes to the next level, which is impact, which is long-term on the society level. Societies change, systems change, institutions change. So those are the three levels. And obviously you have different kinds of indicators for those levels as well. The activities, those are process indicators, very specific stuff, just reporting on if your activity took place. So usually the sources of information to verify that would be your own sources, like an attendance sheet. So if you run a training, that's your activity, the process indicator could be how many people attended that training. And then obviously you're not going to look into the census for that or somewhere external, but you'll just look at the attendance sheet, how many people attended your training. And then you go to the next level where you have output indicators. That is the direct result of the activity. So what happens next? And again, to verify this, you will have to use your own sources. Because if somebody attends your training and they learn something and now they know more, you have to ask that person if they know more, or you have to ask that person if they're planning to change their attitude. That is not any information that you can find in external documents or in databases, because that will not have made its way into those databases yet. You have to use your own sources, like a post-training test, a post-training questionnaire, health measurements, if you did, for example, if you vaccinated people or if you've treated them for a disease, then you have to test them if now they have more antiviral stuff in their blood, whatever it is that you're doing, you have to test the people. You still have to rely on your own sources to be able to report on that indicator. And then you go one level higher, which is midterm. And that is when changes happen that are more systemic. This is also out of your control as an organization, because you cannot control what people do with the services, with the information that you share with them. This is completely up to them. And so here you can still use your own sources, obviously, if you have information on that, but you can also use secondary sources, because if someone learns something in your training and then they change their attitude and then they change the way they do things, then that changes their living conditions. This is something that can be reflected in a census or in an economic survey, stuff like that. This can make their way into external sources. So you can also use secondary sources to describe that indicator and the value on that indicator. And obviously, when we get to the impact indicators, that is high level. This can be an SDG, can be a really, really high level description of what you want to achieve. So there, obviously, you would also refer to secondary sources many times to see if the work you've done actually had that change on the society level that you wanted it to have. So those are the different levels and the different levels of indicators that you can find. Now we go again from the bottom to the top with some more examples. The goal level indicators, it's from the top to the bottom. So from the impact to the actual output. So from a very high aggregation level to a lower one. The goal level indicators are simple to define because you cannot really predict an effect at this level. You don't know how much you will contribute towards eradicating world hunger, stuff like that. So it's broad terms. Some donors don't even want you to have indicators at this level. I think the European Commission, they're not asking you to actually supply impact level indicators because it's almost impossible to report on that, so it doesn't make any sense. So here in these examples, they still have specific numbers, but oftentimes you will find indicators at this level really in broad terms. So mortality is reduced to a specific number of deaths per live births, or the expenditure is reduced, or maybe even more general, the health situation is improved, people's nutrition is better, etc. So this can be broad because you are at this high impact level where you can report this way. They're simple to define because you cannot predict effect at this level. It's broad terms. And your funders will be interested in those, maybe not so much in the indicators, maybe more in the impact. And it reflects the end of the project as a result of the uptake of your outputs and your outcome. This can also be useful for the cost effectiveness analysis because there you can see what impact, what long-term result actually happened in the target group that you work with. So here we have a couple of more examples. Again, you will get the presentation, so you can go through these examples later and see how they were formulated and how they were put together. So now we get to the next level, which is the intermediate results level indicators. So that is outcome, midterm, something that your project should be able to achieve. So this is something that your project should actually achieve. It measures the change at the level of the primary beneficiaries or the target group or the institutions and systems that you work with. It's useful for measuring the effectiveness of your project because this is actually the outcome level. This is what your project is supposed to achieve. It ensures you're client-driven, obviously, because it's about the target group you work with. It should be monitored as early and appropriate in the project life as possible. And when you report on it, obviously, you need to be able to say why something happened, why it didn't, but this is more about reporting than about formulating those indicators. Again, some examples. This could be, this is a milestone. By year 1 is reduced by at least 50%. The first harvest, 75% of trainees are using at least one of the new vegetable production techniques correctly. So this is milestone reporting, but these are the changes in the target group, not in the population, not in a society that was the level above that, but in the target group that you want to achieve specifically with numbers and time bound, so that you can say, yes, we achieved that, or no, we didn't. And then know why, what's the issue, and then solve that issue. So this gives you a lot of insight into how your project is working and how it's going. Then you get one level further down to the output level indicators. So those are the indicators that define the relationship between output and outcomes. It's short term. What happens immediately after the activities? It's supposed to describe what happens immediately after the activities, but it's supposed to be a little bit further. As this example here below shows, it's not just supposed to be the indicator for the output level is we delivered the training. Yes, 5 trainings delivered. No, it should be this tiny bit more. 5 trainings delivered, plus people learned something. People gained knowledge. People attended happily, stuff like that. So this indicator needs to describe a little bit more than just the thing happened. So you can do this, for example, by having a questionnaire after a training. If we stay with this training example, where people can show that they learned something, or where they can tell you if they were happy about the training, if they liked it, if they would recommend it to their peers, etc. So you need that tiny little bit more here. Yeah, so here again you have examples, percentage coverage, have improved knowledge, so that would probably be done by a test, etc. And then the very, very bottom at activity level, those are things that just did the activity happen, yes, no. How many people came, how many attended, etc. So those are process or progress indicators, just kind of ticking the boxes if you did what you were supposed to do at the very, very bottom level of this kind of pyramid. So here, again, 2 examples, 2 camps organized, 1,000 women participated. So those are at the activity level. Sometimes activities are not even included in the log frame, but again, to understand the whole logic, the logical framework that starts at the activity level, you can still include them. And this also helps to ensure that you don't, by accident, use these indicators at the output level, which is the next one, because again, that is not enough. It needs to be a tiny little bit more than this. Yeah, I've said that before, indicators need to be smart. This is something that you always have to check. Are they specific to your result statement? So specific to the one, the thing that they're supposed to describe. Are they measurable? Can you measure? It can be qualitative or quantitative, but you need to be able to measure somehow. Achievable, is it realistically possible to meet the indicators within the time? Relevant, are they relevant to the informational needs of the different people who will use the data? Because it doesn't make sense if you have an indicator that's not relevant for anybody, but it's easy to measure. Sometimes I see people include stuff like that just because you can get good measurements on it. That doesn't mean that it's relevant. And time bound or timely, you need a time frame for your indicators. So every single indicator needs to be smart, because otherwise it's very difficult to report on them. One tip about indicators that I found very useful, sometimes you just can't come up with any. Sometimes your mind blanks. You can also use AI to help you with that. Because if you, at least it can suggest stuff. Of course, you can't copy what they say and then just use that. But it gives you suggestions, and sometimes there's very good ideas within that. So if you can't come up with an indicator, just put the information you have in ChatGPT or Gemini or whichever system you use and say, can you suggest indicators on the different levels? And oftentimes it's interesting suggestions that you can then work with if you come up blank by yourself, and if the indicators don't kind of explain themselves. So now we get to sources of verification. How can you actually report on those indicators? How can you verify them? How can you come up with the numbers? Because you can make up any number of indicators, but if you can't report on them, then obviously you run into a different set of problems. So the sources of verification obviously are determined by the indicators themselves, and they will be used to measure the performance of your project. They will be the main component of your monitoring cost. So if you have a budget for this, you have to think about where will that data come from, how can we get it again, and how much will it cost. They should be accessible, reliable, and up to date, which is not always easy. For example, if you use census data and your project runs for 3 years, there's not going to be a census every 3 years, stuff like that. Or if you have some budget to do a preliminary study, but not the same budget to actually do another study at the end of your project, it's going to be difficult for you to report on some indicators. So you have to think of those things in advance to be prepared and to know what's coming. It can be official statistics or data, but the difference or the challenge here is that they might not be up to date or reliable. As you know, in some of the countries that you work in, statistic data that is reliable is very hard to come across. And they should be triangulated if possible. So if you have 2 or 3 sources that say the same thing, then, well, you probably can rely on it more than if it's just one. Then you have your own project records, which can be a great source of verification, but obviously they need to be reliable. You can't tamper with your project records and then hope that someone will accept them. So you have to be careful that, yeah, that all the information you use is timely, that you've collected the data in a timely manner, in a correct manner, that the people were trained to do so, etc. Then you have quantitative tools, for example, surveys, polls, structured questionnaires. They can give a lot of great insight, especially when you want to monitor or when you want to report on a change in perception, a change in attitudes, etc. But they can also be challenging to collect. It's sometimes difficult to compare, difficult to kind of create a database, and they are not adequate for every single level. So for process indicators, sometimes it's not it doesn't work as well as for others, because obviously at this level you just want to know if somebody attended, if people came, and the attitude change, etc. That will be on a higher level. But it can also be, especially when you do interviews, that can be time consuming and thus costly as well. Then you have other qualitative tools like focus group discussions, interviews, observations. They lack the precision, obviously, of the tools where you can where you can count stuff. Difficult to compare, but they can be useful. And again, you need to invest a little bit to be able to really report on those in a way that you can compare. So before you choose sources of verification for your indicators, think, are you able to conduct the study or the data collection you need not only once, but maybe twice or maybe even 3 times if you need to report at a milestone. So just know what comes after. Obviously, you need to match the sources of verification with indicators. Some of the not all sources of verification will work for every single indicator, but they are obviously determined by the indicators, because that's those are the means that are used to measure those indicators. If you work for a bigger project, often that data is not collected by project or program staff, but you will have someone external, an evaluator, who will help you with that. But I know in reality, in the field, for many small organizations, that's not realistic because we don't have enough money for that. So oftentimes we have to do the evaluation ourselves. So then it's still our staff or our team that would collect that information. You can also try to get data from international organizations like the World Bank, UN, government statistics, Amnesty International. But as we said, that's sometimes difficult to have, to compare, because oftentimes you will find good data for the beginning of your project, but then that study is not necessarily repeated by the end of your project. Like a census is only done every 10 years. So if your project runs 3 years, then it won't help you on this. So you also have to think about the source of verification for your starting value, but also for your end value, because you will need, another source of verification for where you're at the end of your project. So here again, we have some examples for the mortality rate. You could use a data source by the government or the records of the Ministry of Health. food expenditure, the source of verification could be records of the Department of Agriculture or FAO data. They also publish data about this, but just be very careful that they're always reputable sources and that you know where that data is coming from or where that information is coming from. When you get to the specific objective, so at the lower level, obviously you won't have so many external sources. You will need to go back to the qualitative, quantitative sources that you can create yourself. It's collected often by consultants or a separate M&E team. So you get that different level of information for the different levels of results that we talked about. So here again, the specific objective indicators would be number of children under the age of 5 in a village. So for that, you could use a survey or qualitative interviews with health workers. And again, the second example, 90% of trainees are reporting an increase in vegetable production. Again, this could be a survey, could be a focus group discussion with women farmers to get that data. So for here, you have to start collecting data yourself, and you can't rely on external sources because nobody will have that data. We get more to the detail level, the intermediate results. Here, you focus on the people that actually benefit from your project, that work with you, the target group themselves. So obviously, you also have to ask them. So that data will come from them. The records of the projects, the records of local bodies, quantitative methods, so just asking them, talking with them. Again, an example, how many children with diseases are there, so you can check the health center records or the survey of your target group. More trainees are using other techniques. Again, a survey with trainees, because that data is nothing that you could find anywhere else. And then at the output level, you obviously, because the output level describes the intermediate or the immediate result of your activities. So this is information that you will find in your project records and in your monitoring tools. And this will be data collected by the field staff and project management. You can check this in detail if you're interested. The same goes for the activities. Some final tips for sources of verification. If you want to measure changes in attitudes, opinions, or behavior, you can use surveys, obviously, because this is where you will be able to measure these kind of changes. When you use the formulation or the phrasing, 75% of survey participants self-report that, then you kind of leave yourself an escape clause if the change that you hope to achieve later is not achieved, because when they self-report, that's still not a guarantee that they actually do what they told you they will, but it still gives you some good values on progress. So obviously not to cheat here or to not say the truth, but understanding what people self-report is going to be an interesting part, and it will help you to understand how your project worked and how the success rate of your project works. But obviously self-reporting is still not a guarantee for an actual change in the lives of people, because if you send people to a rehab center, then many of them will self-report later that they never relapsed. But that's often not the reality, because people don't like to say, well, yes, I went to that training, but I'm not using any of it. So obviously self-reporting is different than the reality. And it's always good to use sources of verification that can be independently verified by a third party. So for example, surveys, production records, etc. Because then if you have to work with an external evaluator at the end of your project, it's easy to show how you came up with those things. And then just very, very quickly, critical assumptions and risks at the end, because we're almost running out of time. The critical assumptions and the risks are the very, very last column of the log frame. Critical assumptions must hold true if your logic ladder is to be valid in real life. They're derived from your in-depth understanding of the operating context of your proposal. Critical assumptions factor outside of your control, which are required to happen or continue happening in order for your theory of change to remain true, for your activities to produce the expected results. So critical assumptions are things that you assume will happen, and they need to happen for your project to be a success. So there could be things like the climate will change, stay the same, or the teachers we train will stay with our school, stuff like that. So things you assume will happen, and only if they happen, the project will be a success. This shows how well you know the project that you're planning here, that you're describing. It gives you another opportunity to show your in-depth knowledge of this. And this is an opportunity where I think many people don't use it to show their knowledge, and then they sometimes choose very, very broad assumptions. So something like the climate will stay the same. Well, yeah, that's true. And it needs to stay the same for your project to work, but it doesn't necessarily show that you really thought about all the critical assumptions in your project. So use this opportunity to really show that you are an expert. How to write the statement? It's a positive statement such as medical supplies will continue to be available. Teachers will continue to work for this school. The climate will stay the same, like a positive statement. Risks are things that must not occur or must not have a significant impact on your project if your logic ladder is to hold true in real life. They are potential external events beyond your control, which may either negatively affect your project or significantly alter your project. So those are things, yeah, that's a risk. For example, if you work in a country with a political system that is not very stable, a risk could be that there could be a coup, or maybe, yeah, a conflict, etc. Those would be risks that if they happen, your project will probably not happen, not be successful. Those should be things that are based, obviously, in reality, things that have a low probability of happening, but they could happen. And this, again, gives you an opportunity to show that you are an expert in that field, in that area, in that country that you're working in, and that you already have some kind of a plan of how you would deal with this if it happened. You can still describe that. Yeah, and with this, we come to the end of this presentation. I think now you know how to fill out the full log frame. You know how to use it in your proposals. Well, it's a good base for it, because then obviously the narrative of your proposal would have to follow the logical framework and would have to follow all those steps. And if you consider everything I've told you today and in our last webinar, I think you'll be in the position to write a logical framework that is attractive for donors, that makes sense, that follows the logic, and that actually helps you to win grants and win opportunities. If you still want to learn more about this, we actually have a full online course about how to create log frames that that are attractive for donors. Usually we sell this at $200, but today, because you took part in this webinar, we made a special offer, and we're selling it at just $100, 50% off. So again, if you want to learn more about this by our trainer, Christopher, who is an expert in this area, then I really recommend this course. It has 4 modules, I think, and he goes into a lot of detail with every single thing that I talked about in those compressed 2 webinars now. We also have many other online courses, for example, how to raise funds from USAID, but also more general ones, how to write a proposal, what is online fundraising, etc. So if you're interested in those, please feel free to check them out at philanthropia.org. You can get them at 35% off with the coupon code fundraise. So if you're interested in any of those, please check them out at philanthropia.org. We also have a donor database, which is which has 5,000 donor profiles available, and you can search for opportunities. You can search for potential donors for yourself. You can try it for free for a week. So yeah, if you're interested in that, check that out as well. And now we still have time for questions, but unfortunately, my mouse just died, so I cannot open the chat. I remember that there was one question about the I think it was specific objective, overall objective, etc. So this is kind of the ladder that I described in last webinar. So if you didn't catch that one, I recommend you go to our YouTube channel to listen into that webinar again, because I go into detail to the different levels. So in general, I can tell you, you start at the bottom with the activities. They lead to outputs. Those outputs lead to outcomes, and this is when you're at the level of the specific objective. Then you get to the overall objective, which is what you want to achieve with your project, and then you get to the goal level, which is impact, or like higher level, long-term societal change that you want to achieve. So these are the different levels, and I went into a lot of detail into how to describe those in that last webinar. Yeah, I'm very sorry I cannot open the Q&A at the moment because I have some technical issues. But yeah, I hope this was useful for you. I hope you were able to take away some interesting input from this. And we have another webinar about fundraising from US foundations, which is a paid webinar, but I think also very, very useful. So if you're interested in that, please go to philanthropia.org as well and check that out. And we will be letting you know about our next topics, which I think will be in August, because July is also vacation time here. And then we'll invite you again for our next webinar. Thank you so much, and I wish you a good day and see you next time. Thank you.